Hello, Candace and Ashley.
Hello.
All right, audience, I do apologize. We're starting a couple minutes late, but we are getting ready to start. I would like to say welcome, welcome, welcome. All right. Hello, I am Jonathan F. Smith, the Executive Director of Legacy, and Legacy stands for Leadership, Empowerment, Growth, Achievement comes from our youth. We offer programs such as tutoring, arts, and theater, as well as health and wellness. And today's webinar falls under our health and wellness. And it is titled, The Pandemic Fallout and the Impact on Our Youth. Now today, I am joined with a dynamic group of panelists. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Ashley Hall. She is a lifelong educator with a passion for doing what's best for all children while ensuring the educators' needs are met, as well as a graduate of the University of Missouri. Dr. Hall later went to Baker University, where she earned both her master's and doctorate degrees. Her dissertation was on the perceived effectiveness of the Teach for America program from the perspective of traditional trained educators. Over the course of her career, Dr. Hall has served as an educator in various capacities for the past 20 years. She has worked in the child care sector as a teacher, special events coordinator, staff trainer, and curriculum writer. She has served as a teacher aide, paraprofessional in an elementary classroom, servicing students with severe autism, emotional disturbance, selected mutism, and mild to severe behavior disorders. She has also worked as a classroom teacher in various school districts, teaching second, third, and fourth grade. Dr. Hall now serves as instructional coach in the Kansas City, Kansas Public School District, where she works with teachers to improve classroom instructions. In this role, Dr. Hall has also served as the literary coordinator and building level testing coordinator. Outside of the schoolhouse, Dr. Hall has led several workshops and speaking engagements, including sessions as the Women of Worth Annual Conference, the Missouri Research and Education Network Annual Conferences, and the Educate, Organize, Advocate Conference on Social Justice. As a community activist, Dr. Hall is currently a chair on the Kansas City, Kansas Public Schools Diversity Council, working with the Race and Ethnicity Cabinet. She is also on the board of Legacy for the past several years as educational court consultant and secretary. She has also served as president for the North Kansas City chapter of the Missouri State Teachers Association. She is also a member of the Societas DACA chapter of Kansas City, Greater Kansas City, and Dr. Hall is also a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, which she has served as chapter president, second vice president, parliamentary, and a host of other positions. As an inspiring novelist, Dr. Hall has served several forthcoming literary works, including a couple of children's series. In their free time, she does a lot, but in her free time, she enjoys reading, writing, fitness, trying new recipes, and traveling. Welcome, Dr. Hall. Our next panelist is Gerald Payne. Gerald Payne is a psychotherapist and a licensed specialist clinical social worker with 23 years of clinical experience. He has an outpatient therapy practice, but has also provided treatment services in foster homes, group homes, and detention centers. He sees children, adolescents, adults, couples, and families in his private practice. Mr. Payne received his bachelor's degree from Kansas State University in pre-law interdisciplinary social studies in 92 and his master's in social work from the University of Missouri, 98. He has been a field instructor for the University of Kansas School of Social Work program and has 20 years of experience providing clinical supervision to LMSW level therapists preparing for advanced clinical licensures. Gerald Payne serves on the board of two organizations, the Metropolitan Association of African American Psychotherapists and the Legacy. Mr. Payne has written columns for Diesel Magazine and the Kansas City Mental Health Examiner and authored a book. Therapist notes, his new book, JP Asked and Answered, will be released in 2022. He's the co-host of the radio show Cognitions and Speak the Unspeakable with JP and Stacey D. He is also the co-host of the podcast, The Alpha Male Perspective, which launched in March of 2022. Welcome, Gerald. And lastly, and definitely not least, Ms. Candace E Cox. Ms. Cox is the founder and clinical director of A&A Inspirations and executive director of Chaos. Candace holds a BSW from the Southeast Missouri State University and a master's from St. Louis University. She is a phenomenal author, motivational speaker, trainer, and curriculum developer. Since 2004, Candace has moved out of her passion to assist all individuals by creating Chaos, which stands for Keep Healing and Overcoming Struggles mindset. The Chaos mindset uses a combination of cognitive behavioral therapy, relationship trauma repair, and mindfulness to assist individuals with assessing, addressing, and reducing the effects of toxic and traumatic stress in their lives. Candace is a proclaimed chaos kid, while growing up with her own challenges with attention being abandoned by her father and having a mother who lives with post-traumatic stress disorder. She developed the model to live a life of chaos. Candace is very passionate about meeting individuals where they are to assist them with getting to where they want to be in life. For this reason, she started implementing her Organized Chaos program in schools and community centers to address the lack of social and emotional coping skills that were being taught both at home and educational environments. After realizing the importance of addressing toxic and traumatic stress on all levels, Candace expanded her reach to include first responders and corporate mental health in 2015. Candace utilized innovative and experimental treatment modalities to change the focus of being labeled to living beyond labels. In 2016, her first therapeutic children's book was published titled Please, Oh Please, focusing on coping and skill building with ADHD. The book derives from a series which encompasses various mental health diagnosis and also emphasize on the patient, which is PATIENT, skill, which stands for pause and think, inhale, exhale, now talk. Candace is now a best-selling author of several books and journals, as well as a winner of several humanitarian awards. Candace works daily as a catalyst in the lives of others to propel them forward while creating programs that introduce and implement social communication and positive resolution techniques. Candace believes life happens, but it does not have to stop. We all have the ability to create new normal as we keep healing and overcome struggles. Thank you to our panelists. Welcome. How are y'all doing?
Great.
Doing awesome. And yourself?
Doing fantastic. Let's get right into it because we're low on time, so I don't want to overlook anything. But one thing is the COVID-19 pandemic has presented many challenges to students, educators, and parents. Children already coping with mental health conditions have been especially vulnerable to the changes, and now we learn about the broad impacts on students as a result of schools being closed, physically distancing guidelines and isolation, and other unexpected changes to their lives. A Gallup poll as recent as June 2020 says nearly 3 in 10 say their child is already experiencing harm to their emotional or mental health because of social distancing and closure. And another 14% indicate their children are approaching their limits, saying they could continue social distancing a few more weeks or until their mental health suffers. Well, I want to open up the question with this panel. Starting with Gerald, what are some changes you have seen in children through therapy and children that you see? And also, what should parents recognize in their children as we go through this pandemic?
Okay, some of the changes that I've seen, For those children and adolescents who already have a baseline of anxiety, the pandemic has exacerbated those symptoms, because a global pandemic that has gone on for 2 years is understandably going to result in some anxiety. Also, there's an increased likelihood of some depression, because anxiety and depression oftentimes will run together. It's depressing to feel anxious all the time. And so for those kids who already have a baseline of anxiety, whether it's what we call generalized anxiety disorder, which is just a kid who is generally anxious across multiple areas, or what is really common in today's youth is social anxiety. And so kids who are already struggling with that, a global pandemic is going to exacerbate those symptoms. For kids who do not have a baseline of anxiety, they are exhibiting or at risk of exhibiting, for those who aren't exhibiting it yet, what we call adjustment disorder, either adjustment disorder with anxiety, adjustment disorder with depressed mood, or adjustment disorder with mixed anxiety and depressed mood. And the difference between the adjustment disorder with anxiety and generalized anxiety disorder is that it's the symptoms of anxiety or the symptoms of depression, but they are being caused by a life-altering event like a pandemic. And so parents who are seeing their kids who already had anxiety and it's exacerbated, or parents whose kids did not have it and they're beginning to see the symptoms of anxiety, the excessive worrying, irrational fears, confusion, a confused state as far as, okay, how do I handle this? 30 kids were sent home from my school today who tested positive for COVID. And how does that affect me? And am I going to contract COVID? That is what the parents are seeing. And that is what the educators are seeing and trying to manage as well.
Candace?
And,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask Candace, what has she seen or experienced in the healing process, or just dealing with the children and parents together?
I mean, Gerald really just kind of hit on, on a lot of it. One of the biggest things that I have been noticing is I've had a lot of kids that have been having an increase, with their anxiety. They have been triggered a whole lot easier because they have been in the homes where there has been a lot that's been happening, where there were parents that weren't able to get out of the house and cope the way that they normally did. And so the increase in adverse childhood experiences has happened, where there has been some verbal things that have happened within the house, or some physical things that have happened, or increase with alcohol, or increase with domestic violence, increase with drug use, different things like that have happened. And so the kids have been inside of the homes with that, and now they're going back into the schools. And, I look at things from a trauma lens. And so, I've been noticing that these babies are fighting, they are fleeing, where they're trying to avoid, they're not trying to do things. A lot of kids, I don't want to go to school. They get up in the morning, I don't want to go, I can't go. Once they get to school, now they're having these somatic issues. Now my stomach is hurting me, I'm having a headache. Oh my God, I'm so exhausted, I can't stay awake. They're failing in a lot of their classes because some of them were behind because they didn't really learn a lot during the virtual shutdown. And so now they're in class and they're having a hard time concentrating. A lot of them, like I have a lot of kids that I meet that they were straight A students, and now they're not. And so that's causing a hit with them with their self-esteem and self-worth. There's just, a lot of there's mood swings and, different things of that nature. And, parents are having a hard time because they're not sure what this is. Is this my child? And this is normal. I see a lot of adolescents. Is this normal teenage behavior, or is this something else? And in a lot of cases, we have to be very mindful that we are struggling through this, and our babies are also struggling through this, and their brains aren't developed yet. So it's like we really have to make sure that we, for parents, if nothing else, have conversations with your kids. have real conversations with them about what's happening, about what's going on, how's your body feeling. I tell parents all the time, on Sundays, do a family meeting, sit down, what's the highs and the lows of the week, and what do we want to do differently going into the next week? Not only looking at, what's happening within school, but what's happening within this household, and just talking about relationships, because you have kindergartners that are going into school that were never in school before, and now they're first graders. You have middle schoolers that were in elementary, and now they're in middle school. You have high schoolers that they spent their whole freshman year in virtual, and now they're in high school. And so all of these different things are happening, and these kids they don't really know how to deal with each other because they socially missed the year. And so, for anything, with educators and parents alike, I just say, again, be patient with them, because they're trying to figure it out just like we are.
Yes, I want to bring Dr. Hall into this. When you're in the classrooms and traveling between the classrooms in your profession, what have you seen or have you experienced what Gerald and Candace have said? Are you seeing these things up front on the front line?
Well, we've definitely seen an increase in children requesting to go to the nurse, a lot of children calling in sick, and like a lot of that anxiety, it is there and it is very real. Also, what we're seeing in the classroom is that students are having a hard time bonding with each other. It's been over a year, in some districts, almost 2 years since they've been in class with other students their age. So they are having a real hard time with that social aspect of making friends, going through friendship. How do you have a conversation with someone? How do you take turns? How do we share? Things like that. Like that is just, and I'm in elementary, so I'm seeing that K-5, just that whole struggle to connect with others. We're seeing even like teachers, it's hard for them to build that classroom community, because another aspect is we're always having absences, at different times and points of the year, different students have to quarantine for different reasons. And so all of this compounds to make it just very hard to make those connections, especially in the younger grades. That is essential to, building that foundation for a solid year of school so that they can have confidence in themselves to move forward as a learner. And we're even seeing like a lack of confidence with a lot of students too. They're not willing to take risks. The older students, they don't want to try something new. They don't want to try to even read this book that might be a little more challenging, because they don't have that confidence there. So it's just affected like the whole child, the whole development of the child.
And Gerald and Candace, have you seen this in therapy sessions, that you see kids or students who are lacking that confidence or don't know how to conduct themselves in social settings?
Yeah, the truth of the matter is our youth, even prior to the pandemic, we have been seeing a drastic increase in social deficits because of the modern world that we live in. Technology, electronics, we are seeing young people who will they can be in the same room with someone and will text that person, as opposed to turning to them and having a conversation. And so our youth were already experiencing increasing social deficits that we as a society had not really started to address. Our world is becoming more and more technological. Mm-hmm. And so then when you add a layer of a pandemic on top of that, and these kids are at home and not even going to school to socially interact, their social outlet is maybe playing a video game, and there are other kids playing the game all over the world, mm-hmm. which is a poor form of socially connecting. And so this is something that was already an issue with clients I see in therapy who I was working with them on, their social anxiety and social deficits. Well, the pandemic put them in a position where they weren't able to do the homework assignments that are targeting that. Because when it comes to anxiety, the anxiety disorders, the approach that we take is what's called a cognitive behavioral approach. The cognitions are the thoughts, because you have to identify the thoughts that are causing and exacerbating the anxiety. and address those thoughts, look for those distorted thinking errors, distorted cognitions is what we call them, and address each of them to reduce the anxiety. Well, the behavioral intervention is them actually doing exposure, what we call systematic desensitization, going out in public and socially interacting. This is parents putting their kids on athletic teams and different things like that. Well, for those kids, they aren't able to do that because of the pandemic. So it just exacerbated all of that. But this has been a problem prior to the pandemic.
And Candace, are you seeing some kids or even parents that because of being quarantined or not being able to go out, they are reluctant to go out in public and kind of have to overcome that anxiety of being out in public for fear of the pandemic or fear of just interacting with other people? Are you seeing that?
I mean, you know, I've seen it in regard to the kids wanting to go to school. Like that's been a big thing. You know, I have kids that, you know, like I say, they wake up in the morning and like, I don't want to go. Like parents, I've had to write letters for students, you know, asking, you know, can they have an additional 15 or 20 minutes in the morning time, you know, kind of have that leeway so that the parent has time to get them there because they physically cannot get out of the bed. Like it's crippling for them. You know, I've had, you know, an increase, like I said, of the kids that are really dealing with a lot of the somatic stuff. And, you know, it's been a battle because, you know, a lot of parents don't understand mental health. And so there's a lot of abuse that is happening because kids are dealing with anxiety and parents may think that they're doing this, you know, this is a choice that they're making. And it really is not. You know, I've had to, you know, really explain to parents that I need you to make sure that you're listening to what's being said and not necessarily how it's being said, because, you know, it can come out aggressive. It can come out loud. It can come out intense when they're telling you that they don't want to do something. But, you know, let's get to the root of it. There's a reason why they don't. And, you know, when you're able to process, you know, like Gerald was talking about, when you're able to process those thoughts and you're able to look at and really have conversations with them in regard to what's going on, then you can, you know, you can kind of make, you know, different moves. But, you know, a lot of kids are really concerned, especially with the schools having to report, you know, who has the COVID cases. And, you know, they're coming home and they're saying, I had one kid, you know, that I saw her and she's like, it's only 7 people in my math class and it's supposed to be X amount of people, but everybody is gone and everybody's on virtual because of this. Or the panic of I was sitting next to them and I was working with them. And now what? I touched their pencil. Does that mean that I'm going to have it? You know, so it's just dealing with all of that. They're panicking, and rightfully so, you know. And so I think it's very important for us to, you know, as we do in our sessions, but also just talk to your kids and validate what they're saying. It's important. Their fears are valid. And
you touched upon something that I think we need to really talk about as far as parents, because they may not be aware of this. You said abuse. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I would like for each one of you to talk upon. If you're seeing more suspected abuse coming through the classroom, and how are parents handling this? Because I know they're stressed with having to face the pandemic, work, and all these different things, and sometimes it comes out in incorrect fashion. So could you elaborate a little bit more on what the various abuses are? Because some people think of abuse as just physically putting your hands on someone. So could you start with that, Candace?
Well, I mean, you have to think about it, you know, just the way that we're talking about the kids and their increased anxiety and things that they're dealing with. And like Gerald said, this didn't, you know, COVID didn't make this stuff happen. It kind of exacerbated what was already going on. And so that means that the parents that were dealing with depression, the parents that were dealing with anxiety, the parents that were dealing with trauma, the parents that were dealing with bipolar, the parents that were dealing with all of these things, the parents that were in toxic relationships, that were dealing with addiction, all of this stuff, you know, they were dealing with this stuff prior to. And now it's increased. And so now, you know, in many cases, there were children where parents could have maybe left the house and gotten a drink, or left the house and did something and they couldn't. And so the heightenedness of whatever was happening, kids got hit more, kids got yelled at more. kids got, I know kids that have gotten punished and put in their room and they had to stay there all day because the parent is like, I don't want to see your face because the parent is so irritated or agitated, and so those types of things have been happening. And we have to understand that that is abuse and neglect. You can't just knock the crap out of a kid because of their voice is irritating you. It's like, and those types of things have been happening. Even during the virtual sessions that I was doing, I would have to say sometime, hey, can you have the mom come to the screen? Hey, can you step out for a second? Hey, mom, I can't work with this baby if you cursing that one out in the background and I can hear you here. Like, you have to think about, we have to address those types of things. And so, we have to really think about as parents when we talk about verbal abuse, because verbal and emotional abuse, those are the scars that you don't see.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, we really have to think about what we are saying to our children, because that becomes their internal chatter. And so words like saying that they're dumb, that they're being stupid, that they, calling them outside of their names, just talking down to them because you're having a bad day, those things become their internal chatter and they become products of those environments. And so we have to be mindful of what we're pouring into our babies and be mindful. I always say we have to check ourselves before we check our kids.
All right. And before I go to you, Gerald, I want to ask Dr. Hall, have you noticed an increase or the same amount of kids that come to school that you suspect could be abused, or even through virtual learning, you like you said, Candace, that there are some voices you hear in the background. Have you seen some things that are on virtual that cause you to question what's really going on in that home?
Well, and the thing with virtual is that for the first time, it took the school inside of the house. So a lot of teachers, if administrators were on in the Zooms, we could see a lot of things that we previously didn't know were going on in the background. Like what Candace was saying, we could hear the parents and their choice of words and hear those inappropriate words towards their children. We could hear their interactions with each other, with other parent or with other children in the house. And you could also kind of see, it's not like a direct form of abuse, but like even how some of them would upkeep, because if it's not, if you don't take care of your house and clean it up and things like that, then that can lead to another issue as well. And so we were just able to see a whole range of issues that not being inside of the house, you don't see often. And so it did open a lot of eyes to a lot of things that were going on. And now that, the carryover, now that a lot of districts are back in person, is kind of just seeing like the after effects. So how children are coming into school. A lot of like what we said with question one, they're not as apt to want to come in, but then you also have the other side of the kids who aren't ready to go home. They would just want to stay at school because this is their safe place. This is where they feel safe. This is the adult who gives them value, makes them feel loved. And I'm not saying that like in all instances, I'm just saying that we've seen those kind of an uptick in how often that has occurred. So it's been very eye-opening. But as far as like actual abuse, in my position, I haven't seen it, but I've seen things that will make you kind of question.
Gerald, what would you like to add to that?
Just, I absolutely agree with what Candace was saying, that we can't fully assess a child's ability to cope with the stress and the anxiety of the pandemic without taking a look at the parents. Because parents who have poor coping skills, those kids, the children of those parents are going to exhibit more struggles to cope, because when you look at parenting and the many different parenting styles, the many different parenting types, and basically levels of parenting, those parents who themselves, as Candace was saying, who, they're coping by self-medicating, perhaps with drugs or alcohol or this or that, or just in general. Because I've had parents who, they're not self-medicating with drugs or alcohol, but they come into their session saying, it's not my job to educate my kids. I'm working. How am I supposed to work? I'm at home working virtually all day. I'm supposed to be putting in an 8-hour shift, but at the same time, I'm supposed to be helping my kid to get their education virtually. That's not my job. I'm not able to do that. I'm not an educator. And so those parents who struggle with how they cope, that's where you get into some of the emotional abuse, the psychological abuse, and sometimes, yes, physical abuse as well. And so when we're taking a look at our children, and this is something I explain to the educators that I see in therapy, I remind them, as you look at this child, you need to look beyond the child to what that household looks like, the coping skills of those parents, because that is going to play a very large part in how this child is experiencing this pandemic and how this child is coping.
And before I read this next thing, I'd just like to say, any of our audience members have any questions, please post them in the question and answer, and we'll try to get to them. But I want to say, Active Minds, a nonprofit advocacy group supporting mental health education for students, has also reported some concerning statistics this year. A recent survey found that 80% of students have experienced some negative impact to their mental health due to the pandemic, and 20% say their mental health has significantly worsened. Now, are you seeing an increase in depression, or is it about the same? Because unfortunately, we heard about earlier today that Regina King's son committed suicide. And we don't know what he was going through, but have you seen some depression or cases where kids or parents or teachers are dealing with the situation that is so problematic that they really don't know how to handle it? I'll start with you, Dr. Hall.
We've definitely seen children who are sadder than they usually are. And I have seen just a lot more kind of like an overall sense of not necessarily hopelessness, but kind of like loss. I have seen a lot of children who have lost loved ones for various reasons. And the counselors have been very active this year. Definitely. Teachers have stepped in to counsel a little bit too in the school setting, but it's a lot going on, and there's a lot of layers. There is a lot of loss, and everyone's trying to just help out how they can. And even with teachers, like there's been some teachers have had a lot of loss, and that's something in addition to all the other stressors related to the pandemic that teachers are going through that they're also dealing with. So it's been a tough year across the board.
What about you, Candace?
Definitely, there's been an increase. One thing that I like I said, I always come from a trauma lens. And so like one thing that we have to understand is that every last one of us has been impacted by an environmental trauma, and that is COVID. And so we are all grieving. We're all grieving the loss of what life looked like prior to, and we're really, in different stages of trying to figure out what it's supposed to look like now, so that, we're trying to create a new normal. So it's happening with our kids. Our kids are feeling hopeless. They're feeling helpless. They're feeling like this is the way it's always going to be. I don't know if things are ever going to change. I hate this. They're going through all of these things, and they're all or nothing thinkers right now. On top of the educators are feeling overwhelmed, and they're feeling helpless, and they're feeling hopeless, and they are coming to school after someone in their family has passed from COVID, and they are scared, but they are coming. The elementary school, I've done professional developments, and my elementary school teachers are like, it breaks my heart because I want to hug my students, and I am scared because my elderly mother is at home and I don't want to take anything home to her. And so that constant run of having to pretty much mentally kind of disconnect and just kind of go on autopilot to get things done is happening across the board, and people are really emotionally tapped out. And so people are tired, and our babies are tired too. And that's the reason why it's so important for us to have these conversations, because people are feeling like they're alone and they don't have any other choices, and nobody understands what they're going through. But we're all grieving. Everybody's grieving the loss, and no one knows what it's going to look like. So that uncertainty is that underlying fear, which stops us from being able to be in the present or happy in the present because of the worry of that hypervigilance of what else is going to happen. When is the other shoe going to fall? And so there's definitely been an increase, not only with our kids, but with the adults as well.
Gerald, what can you add as far as teachers that you've talked to about this situation that they're experiencing?
In working with teachers, it's a two-sided coin. It's working with them on their coping and the fear and the frustration that they are feeling, as well as working with them and providing them with the necessary psychoeducation for how they can support their students. And so it's important for them to have an outlet when they come into therapy to be able to talk about the things that Candace and Ashley are talking about, just the fear and coming into the building. And, you know, last week, 1 million kids were diagnosed with COVID. To be in a profession where you have to go into a building where 30 and 40 kids are being sent home in a given day, and then you have to go home to your family or your elderly parent that you were taking care of with the fear that you could be bringing COVID home to them. That is a lot of stress up on them. And so helping them to identify those cognitions, those thoughts surrounding their stress and their depression, while also helping them to know how to deal with this with their students. And you mentioned the depression earlier. When you think about depression, the thing about the pandemic is that at this point, no one can see an end in sight. And that is extremely depressing as well as anxiety inducing. We're 2 years in and there's no end in sight. And anytime a child or an adult cannot see an end in sight, that's going to increase the risk of them developing the symptom of hopelessness. Hopelessness is a symptom of depression, and kids don't handle that well. A lot of adults are not handling the pandemic well. And so when you take into consideration, like Candace was saying, their brains are not fully developed. The prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed until the age of 25. And so we have children trying to process what is going on, and there's no end in sight. So yes, that feeling of hopelessness, and then the other symptoms of depression that both teachers and students are seeing, the decreased energy, the increased apathy, to the point where they're like, I don't care anymore. I'm tired of this. The decreased motivation. It's like, why am I stressing about doing this homework? I can't go to school. I'm not able to, it's my senior year. I'm not able to go to the prom or go to the homecoming or do all these things that seniors are supposed to be able to do. And so the symptoms of depression begin to pile on top of each other. And that's what teachers and parents are trying to help kids to deal with.
Well, you know, I would like to read this thing and talk about this in another perspective. Louisiana State Superintendent of Education, Cade Brumley, told the PBS NewsHour, you can have the best programs in the world and the highest level curriculum, but if you don't have highly effective teachers in the classroom, you're not going to get the results for that kid that he or she needs and deserves. Now, Dr. Hall, as you know, we are experiencing a teacher shortage, a custodial shortage, bus driver shortage. What would you like parents to really know, to understand in dealing with teachers that have different stress levels and different things that they're going through? Because I know we talked about it earlier where Gerald mentioned that parents are saying, I'm not the educator. So what are something that you could say that parents may not be aware of teachers are going through?
To add to what you were saying, the shortage is real and it's going to only get worse. Recent data that I had found said that just this past October, between September and October, over 575,000 teachers left the profession. So this shortage is only growing, and as a system, education really needs to come to real solutions and real quick. Because, I mean, when we say everyone's pitching in, everyone is pitching in. I mean, I'm not even in the classroom, but I have subbed more this year than I've subbed ever before. I mean, I've never subbed, and this was my first year having to step into the classroom as a sub. I had to start the year out as a first grade teacher, and I'm an instructional coach because they didn't have that position filled. Then when I left, there came another long-term sub, and then there was another long-term sub, and they finally hired someone, but that person quit mid-year. And so students are seeing so much, I mean, just turnaround, just turnover. It is not consistent. Like, I'm stepping in, I know administrators are stepping in. My principal, he subs almost every day now. It's hard to find him actually being a principal anymore, because if someone's absent, and there are a lot of administrators that do try to pitch in for teachers so that they don't have to take on an extra load. But then there comes a point where other teachers are having to absorb the extra students. So let's say you have 5 third grade teachers and 2 of them are out. Well, those other 3 teachers, they're going to absorb the students from the other 2 classrooms. And that's because, too, there's not enough subs to go around. The sub shortage it's ridiculous. There was another article that said that in some places, you could work at McDonald's for $13 an hour, and you would get paid more working at McDonald's than being a substitute teacher. So who's going to put themselves through the stress, all the extra work it would take, and even the risk of being in the classroom when you could just go to McDonald's? So there are a lot of issues. And so teachers are taking all of this on. And so the classroom, they try their best to, present something that's looks semi-normal for students. But at the end of the day, teachers are drowning. I mean, this is the first year when we have our instructional coaches meeting, I'm hearing of teachers that are breaking down and crying in their teacher meetings. I've never heard of that before. And these aren't new teachers that are doing this either. These are veterans. So there's a lot of breakdown. People are out there breaking points. It is just across the board. This is a tough issue, and I don't know how to solve it because it's only getting worse.
And it's no one is exempt from this meltdown. And like, this thing is called the pandemic fallout. I know working with kids I have in the past, and Candace talks about that trauma lens. I know a part of some kids is they can't handle change and a continuous fluctuation of change. It causes them to act out. And if some of that behavior has not been taught, or how to cope and how to handle those things, and they grow up to be adults and they're going through these same things and they're trying to work with their kids, it can really, really exacerbate the situation. And using your trauma lens, how do you see some of the teachers, parents, and everyone you're dealing with, Candace, that are really feeling this fallout, this meltdown?
Well, just listening to Dr. Hall, I was listening as she was talking. I was like, that's compassion fatigue. You know what I mean? And it's like, that is it. There's a lot of vicarious trauma that is occurring where you have educators that are dealing with their own stuff, and then they have a hard time dealing with the stuff that's happening with other people because I'm tapped out, I'm done, and so you have, it looks like burnout, but it's not. It's like I am stunted. Like I'm having a lot of the same symptoms where I'm anxious, where I am unable to sleep, where I can't concentrate. I'm having a hard time being creative. I'm having a hard time connecting with people. My boundaries are off, like all of those things are happening. I'm having the physical sensations as well of the physical stress, the restlessness, the high blood pressure and different things like that. And it looks just like trauma. It looks just like the symptoms, the physical or the psychological symptoms that you have as a result of trauma. And so, they're burned out, but it's like, I'm having a really hard time helping you when I can't even help myself, and so this is why when I talk to parents, I tell parents, please be patient with your educators, because they're not only trying to figure out what's happening in their lives, but they're also trying to give your children the best that they got at the same time. You know what I mean? So we have to take that into consideration, because I know some parents are overwhelmed. And so they're going in and their children are anxious and coming home and they're overwhelmed. So the parents are coming to the educators and they're snapping out on the educators. And like the educators are like, I quit. I had one teacher, she quit being an educator. She was an educator for over 20 years. She quit and became a barista at Starbucks. She said it's less hectic. She said my blood pressure now is fine, and I don't have to worry about the unrealistic expectations that are placed on me and inside of this school, because nobody knows what's happening right now.
Gerald, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, the struggle is everyone is in what looks like a no-win situation. Earlier, I was talking about not being able to see a light at the end of the tunnel, not being able to see an ending to the pandemic and the effects of it. But the no-win situation is, I'll give you an example. The Journal of American Medical Association, Pediatrics, cited 36 studies, because we've been in a pandemic long enough where now all these studies are coming out, cited 36 studies from around the world that have shown that having kids out of school has resulted in them experiencing increased depression and anxiety. A study out of the UK showed that 53% of girls and 44% of boys had increased symptoms of anxiety and trauma. So when you look at all these studies being done around the world, the studies say, okay, our kids need to be in school. But then when you send the kids to school and 30 or 40 kids are being sent home every day, and 10 or 12 teachers are having to go home because everyone is getting diagnosed with COVID, and the fear and the anxiety in the kids as well as in the parents, it is extremely difficult to send your kid into a school when 1 million kids got diagnosed with COVID. And so the human brain does not process it well when we're in a no-win situation. If you keep your kids at home, you got to, deal with rates of depression and anxiety. If you send them to school, you have to deal with a life or death situation.
And
that's a lot.
It is a lot. And, I want to touch upon this before we go, because, there's been a struggle with the persistent, we need to keep our kids in class for various reasons. And one of the things was a lot of kids are getting their meals at school, or it's a babysitter for parents because they can't afford to be at home to make sure their kids get on the computer to do their schoolwork. So my question is, have you noticed that this is not a economic class struggle, or do you see a struggle differently from low income to what could be considered moderate to middle or upper class? Do you see the struggle being the same across the board, or do you see any differentiation? I'll start with you, Gerald.
No, there's a difference when it comes to socioeconomic status. Some districts, even though the kids were not in school, they still set it up where the parents could bring the kids to pick up their meals. They prepared sack lunches for those families who otherwise the kids would not get any food. Now, I don't know if that has continued to this point. We're 2 years in, but I do know that there were districts that were doing that early on in the pandemic. And that's not something that your middle class and upper class students are going to be dealing with, is a lack of food because they're not going to school. And so those are just additional layers and the differences in how the pandemic has affected different kids and different families, which puts teachers in, because a teacher's in a classroom with kids of various socioeconomic statuses. So they may have some kids who need to have their lunch that day. They may have some other kids who, have parents who make a good living, and that's not their concern. But those parents may have poor coping skills. And so they may be experiencing more of that emotional and psychological abuse at home. And so it's a situation where every kid and family situation has to be assessed individually, but this is extremely difficult to do when you're testing kids and sending 20 or 30 kids home every day. It's a lot trying to juggle the physical aspects of how do we keep the kids safe, as well as the sociological aspects, the psychosocial aspects of, okay, what is this pandemic meaning to this individual child and to this individual child? This child is acting out and lashing out and cursing kids out and punching them, and they didn't typically do that. So we're having some adjustment disorder with disturbance of conduct. What's going on in this child's home? Something that I want to go back to that Candace had mentioned that is so important, that I want parents to, if they don't take anything else away from this, I want them to take this away from the panel discussion. Sitting and having those conversations, keeping the communication open with your children is the first step, because parents touching base with their kids and allowing kids that outlet to express their fears or their frustrations, their anger, all of the different things that they are dealing with surrounding the pandemic. That is a very, very important first step, because if parents do not touch base with their kids on a daily basis, it is so much easier to lose your kids, to lose that contact, and they are left trying to figure out how to cope with this on their own. So parents want to keep the communication up. The problem is some parents didn't have good communication with their kids prior to the pandemic, because I see many kids in therapy whose parents have brought them to therapy because the kids don't communicate with them. So they say, I'm going to take you to see this therapist, and hopefully you'll communicate with the therapist and we can get things sorted out. And then my job as the therapist is to work with the parent and the kid on improving their communication, because they can't stay in therapy with me forever.
All right, we're going to go to Candace and then Ms. Hall, and then I have a question from our audience. Go ahead, Candace.
I am so sorry, ADHD is real. Can you repeat the question?
It is.
I know my truth. I'm like, can you repeat the question?
What I was talking about is the struggle with this pandemic. Do you see a economic class struggle, whereas you see it differently in the high end economics versus the low end economics?
The struggles are different, but the struggles are still there. I think that's what it is. It's they just look different. I see more addiction and more alcoholism and things like that in the higher class, and I see more emotional and physical abuse and neglect in the lower socioeconomic class. But the struggles are still there, and so the amount of struggles isn't different. It's just the type.
And Dr. Hall, and then I'll go to the question that was been asked.
Kind of to piggyback off what Candace was saying, that there's struggles on both ends, but they are just a little different. Like some data is showing that everyone across the board, the spring 2021 test scores, whoever was tested and was able to test, across the board, they were lower. But those discrepancies are even more profound in our students of color. So in a lot of our Black districts, predominantly Black and brown districts, and the districts with the students on the lower end of the socioeconomic status, they saw significant drops. Like in one district, well, in one study, it found that on average, we had 5-month drop in math and a 4-month drop in ELA. But with students of color and students in households under 25,000, it was up to 6 months in both areas. And so they started this year with already 6 months behind. And then if you tap on what is traditionally known as the summer slide, so in education, over the summer, it's said that students kind of drop about 3 months of learning. So they start, any year you are going to start lower than where you left the previous year. So you tack that on to being already behind. Mm-hmm. And so in some instances, you have students who are 2 years behind where they should be at this point in time in the school year. And that's in any socioeconomic class, but it's more going to be found in your Black and brown districts than opposed to your more affluent districts.
Mm-hmm. All right, this is a question from our audience, and it's a good stopping point because we've run out of time. It says, I am working on my master's degree in school counseling. I recently started my practicum at the middle school level. As I begin to work with students individually and in groups, how can I support them when they seek out guidance concerning situations in their lives? And I'll start with you, Dr. Hall.
I would say just having time and making connections. I think that would be one of the biggest key points. When you can make connections with students, they're going to be more willing to open up to you. I mean, even in my role being outside of the classroom, the more connections that I can make with students, the more willing they are to come up to me with just anything. And so you can hear a lot of things when you just make those initial connections. So maybe not necessarily saying to have lunch with them, especially not right now, but just greeting them in the morning in the hallway, putting a face to a name so they can see you and they know you're there. And eventually they'll start to open up to you. And then when they do have those bigger issues, I feel like they'll be more willing to want to come up to you. At least that's what I've seen with counselors in elementary level. The ones who are out in the school and they're more visible, students are more willing to come to them. So.
And Candace, what would you add to that?
Yeah, to piggyback, the connections are very important. And, we as adults, especially we as counselors, we have to understand that no matter what, our clients, our kids, the people that are coming to us, they're the expert on their lives. They know more about themselves than we will ever know about them. And so it's very important to listen to them. It's very important for us to make sure that, we are validating how they feel, assess for safety. That's one of the big things as they're telling you what's going on, make sure that they're safe in their environment, but, be a sounding board. Be a sounding board. And sometimes, especially in middle school, the question has to be, do you just want to get it out, or do you want us to actually process it? Because sometimes they just want to get it out. And so making sure that you are that safe space for them, and please don't violate their trust. That's very important. So, you have to be that safe space, and please do not violate their trust.
Gerald.
Dr. Holland and Candace covered this pretty well. Just being present enough to be accessible to them and establishing that relationship so that you can be that sounding board when they are ready to talk and express their thoughts and their feelings on how they are coping with the pandemic. Just be present and willing to listen so that they do not bottle it all up and then it doesn't seep out in the form of negative behaviors or doesn't get internalized as anxiety and depression.
Thank you, Gerald. I would like to say thank you to Dr. Hall, thank you to Candace, and thank you to Gerald. I hope everyone has received something from this webinar. If you have not, please feel free to email us at forum@our legacy.org, and we can follow up with answers for questions that were not addressed or talked about today. But I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Have a good weekend, and hopefully we can have another forum like this for you in the future. Thank you, everyone.
Everybody.